What does psychedelics really have to do with awakening? What would you say to that?
It's the possibility to surrender. If you ingest enough, it's bigger than your ego. And so really it depends on your attitude, what you want from life, what you want from yourself. What's the meaning of life? If you're asking yourself fundamental questions, then it doesn't matter what you call what you're doing. It will be an avenue for you to open your mind to something unknown.
Hello and welcome to our listeners. I'm Sophia and I'm here today with Eli Jackson-Bear, author and founder and principal teacher of the Lila School of Awakening. Eli is the author of many books on awakening and has just released a new edition of his memoir, An Outlaw Makes It Home, The Awakening of a Spiritual Revolutionary. I just absolutely love this book. Eli, welcome. Thanks for meeting me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Sophia. Thank you for having me.
What I really want to talk to you about today is the healing and awakening potential of psychedelic medicine. So there's something of a renaissance happening at the moment in the field of medicine, psychotherapy, and psychiatry, but the use of psychedelic substances isn't new, and Indigenous people have been using them for healing for thousands of years. 50 years ago, you woke up with LSD during the hippie counterculture movement of the 1960s. Around the time these medicines were criminalized and research basically shut down. Why do you think psychedelics are making a comeback now? And what do you see is their deepest potential for humanity?
Well, that's a good question, Sophia. So rather than why are they making a comeback now, why were they shut down? Why did it go overnight from being legal to being classified where LSD is considered as dangerous as heroin, a narcotic? How did that happen and why, Because before that, it was legal, it was open, people were doing research, people were having experiences. And that was the problem, is people were having deep experiences. And it threatened the cultural thought form. And so the ones who were reactionary and wanted to hold on to the past and hold on to their structures because they were basically structures of oppression, immediately outlawed anything that gave people a glimpse of something beyond. And so that starts with Nixon and then it goes through Reagan and we're still here with it now.
I mean, not many people know that psychedelics were a huge part of psychiatry for about 25 years, from the 50s to the 70s, where there was actually over something around 40,000 people participated in taking these medicines for research, and we just don't really know about it. All we know really now is what's available with psychiatry is pharmaceutical medicines. We know that, but that hasn't really gone anywhere. It hasn't kind of gone anywhere. There hasn't been anything new. So I just feel like it's such an exciting time for medicine to actually start to open up to this again. Because like you say, it was totally shut down because people were opening up.
It still is. No, it still is shut down. And so now it's just starting to open up. But really, I'm not interested so much in medicine as I am in awakening. And so my interest is people waking up. That was what I experienced. I didn't experience any healing with LSD. I experienced awakening. And that's what I'm interested in passing on.
There is a lot of talk about it to do with healing, trauma, this sort of thing at the moment. That's what's happening. And I guess what I'm fascinated with the Lila School is that really there's this sort of two prongs in a way. There's awakening and then there's therapy. So why have the therapy aspect?
The therapy is to wake up from your suffering ego, to see yourself directly. That's the point. When you can discover the mechanics of the emotional, mental, and physical brain, when you can discover the mechanics of being an animal, and the drives, and how the thoughts are created by the drives, and if you can then investigate yourself to find out who you are, that leads to liberation. That's what I'm interested in. So along the way, some people are not interested in that. They're interested in healing the trauma, so why not?
And is that what they're finding in the research, is that they're actually showing, parts of the brain lighting up or whatever, and they're looking at this thing of ego dissolution. They're
Right.
talking about it as the ego dissolution, and that is the very thing that brings the healing.
Yes.
So that's basically exactly what you're speaking about. It's that aspect of these medicines that brings the healing. Yes. So there's talk of, a lot of people are microdosing and things like that. And really, I'd love to hear what you think about that. But what it seems to me is that it's actually that they're missing the whole point, because there's something about the full experience of the power of these medicines to really dissolve the ego. That's what brings about results or change or awakening and healing as a byproduct.
That's what's sacred. And what gets commercialized is, using it so you can work more productively. Then it becomes just another product of capitalism. So it can actually, I don't mean to put it down, microdosing can be useful for certain people at a certain stage. Everything's useful in its own way, and everything's poison in its own way. So whether it's useful or poison depends on your perspective and how you're approaching your life.
So what would you say to someone that, I actually did have an inquiry from someone who asked, how can I use this for awakening? Like, what does psychedelics really have to do with awakening? What would you say to that?
It's a possibility to surrender. Because the mushroom, basically, when you ingest a certain amount, or LSD or whatever it might be, if you ingest enough, it's bigger than your ego. And if you fight with it, you end up in a kind of hell. And you have to go through that hell to get back to reality if you're attached to the fight. And if you don't fight with it, but you avoid it, because it's very easy to avoid it by getting into the sensory experience. People who get lost in outside nature experiences or aesthetic experiences or sexual experiences, there's lots of ways you can miss the essential by going to the senses. But the essential is always there. And so really it depends on your attitude, what you want from life, what you want from yourself. What's the meaning of life? If you're asking yourself fundamental questions, then it doesn't matter what you call what you're doing. It will be an avenue for you to open your mind to something unknown.
Yes. And so your experiences, I guess, back in the 60s when there was this counterculture revolution happening, and you talk about this in the book, and it's a great read. What I just want to know, I guess, is what was it like back in the 60s with the psychedelic time? Like what was that like? Because my experience, so I've had my journey with psychedelics, mainly LSD, in the late 90s, and that was around party culture, the doof, the Australian bush doof. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that was the movement I was part of. And the bush doof was basically a massive party in the middle of the bush in a secret location that you'd get access to about an hour before the party started. So that was my kind of experience. And what was happening in the 60s? Like, how was that part of life then?
That was going on in the 60s too, Mainly people took it to party, and you took it to go to see rock bands, So they would do, when it was still legal, they were doing acid trips, acid tests rather. Grateful Dead was the house band. And you'd go to the Fillmore and everybody would take acid together and listen to music and dance and, have ecstatic experiences. But that's just another pleasure, really. It doesn't lead to something more substantial. But while that's happening, there was every variation happening. For me, I did it, my first LSD experience with a group was with the Hog Farm, which was a commune that came out of Ken Kesey's Merry Pranksters, which was at the very beginning of the 60s psychedelic scene. And so it was a commune that came through town. And so I did a group experience with that, which was different from a party. It was more of a sacred circle. You know, I never did the party part. I preferred to actually, when I did my acid trips, and I did a lot of them, I used to do them alone. Alone on a mountaintop. Oh, that's not true. I mean, I did them everywhere. My first trip was, I was in the poorest black neighborhood of Detroit when I took my first LSD, walking down the street. That was great. So I never had a sitter. I never had a guide. I didn't know anything about set and setting. I just took it in my life as it was and see what showed up.
Yeah, I guess that's in a way where I'm going with this line of thought is that, you know, what's the difference between that versus what I understand that you're doing now with the Lila School in this contained, I mean, it's a whole different thing. It's a ceremony, it's a sacred space, it's for healing, you have a sitter. You know, how is that different?
Well, really, it depends on you. It's like you can't give too much to the external because it's really about an internal. But what we do in the external, well, you can't do the 60s, what we do is we set it up the scene, you know, where people have their proper set and setting with their proper intention, knowing what they want, knowing what they're willing to give for it. All the essential questions get asked before and during. It's once you've started your experience, you've already grounded yourself in something that gives the depth of possibility that we didn't have back then. You know, we just took it and it would happen. Things would happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's how, you know, you and I started talking out because we've talked about this before, obviously, but for those listening, it's, you know, I had this experience of an LSD trip that I'd sort of always, you know, framed as the bad trip and basically just scared me straight. You know, it's like I just wanted to never be psychedelic again. I never wanted to touch any drug, any substance. I wanted to stay in control because it absolutely terrified me. I just was completely overwhelmed in my mind. And yet there came a point after 72 hours or whatever, it was a long one, where this voice inside said, "You are not the mind. You are not your mind." And all of a sudden, it was just absolute silence. And I was aware.
Yes.
There was just awareness, pure awareness. And, you know, I was 17. I'd never read anything about anything. I didn't know about the ego or spiritual, you know, anything. I just was kind of really, for me, I think I was looking for a way out of my mind, actually. I think that's why I got into, you know, smoking cannabis and taking these medicines. I didn't know they were medicines. I was taking these drugs just to get out of this prison that I saw we were all in this.
And it worked.
And something deeply changed. And it wasn't until you reframed this for me, for which I'm so deeply grateful, because I'd had it framed in a certain way and I just thought I was crazy, you know, because it changed me. I always sort of I'd said to people, you know, I've never come out of that trip, and it was like something changed. But my perspective, because I didn't have any understanding, I didn't have any guidance. I didn't know what happened. I knew something happened to me and I didn't know what. I thought maybe I'd gone crazy, but I've never been the same. And that led me on my journey of, you know, awakening. I started meditating. I stopped taking drugs and I started meditating, and I found that this inner light, inner space is here. And it's always here, and it wasn't really coming to you. So I'm so grateful for that. And it's also, you know, perhaps why I'm bringing up the whole party scene, because I know there are so many people that have had these bad experiences, and it's it's really frightened them, and they haven't had any context. They didn't have a sitter, we didn't have a sitter. We didn't know about any of that. We were just having these wild experiences with no context, no preparation. So I love that you're doing that, and I want to share that with people, that actually exists. And in a way, I feel like my integration, we talk about integration, is actually happening now, 25 years later. It's actually, I'm starting to integrate that experience because I just shut it off as like, I don't know what that was. And it's been very healing, actually. It's been very healing as a side effect of realizing what actually happened.
Yes.
And I'm feeling a lot more natural in my life and accepting of myself, Eli, because I think there was this really deep fear that I was crazy because of that. There was this really deep paranoia of madness and fear of madness and fear of, fear, basically, this existential fear that somehow you pointing me to the truth of that has allowed a much greater acceptance of myself, actually.
Yes. So that's Lila therapy.
Yeah. So, this thing of integration, very important. Preparation, integration, very important.
Yes. And important to wake up both psychedelic and without psychedelic.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you had an awakening experience psychedelically, but it didn't translate.
Yes. And I do you think that I believe that's because there was no integration? It changed me, but I just didn't know what to do. So there was I felt split all these many years.
Yeah.
And I've had awakening, and I love, silence, and I've chased that. And then I've also had this incredible fear and control around that. And I feel somehow now they're starting to.
Well, one is your identity as an ego, and the other is your identity as yourself. And as long as you're attached to your identity as an ego, that's separation. That means there's a you and an it. You and oneness, you and love, you and your enlightenment, whatever it might be. And that separation is the suffering, is the illusion of separation. And so that continues running after the psychedelic awakening. The ego continues. Ego reassembles itself and integrates the experience, either negatively or positively, into the narrative of who I am and where I'm going. And that's egoic identity. And that's how the psychedelic enlightenment can get encapsulated into an idea of what happened and what it did and what it means and who I am. And then there's yourself, which is open, loving silence, loving love, quiet, free. And then you see what you're identified with and where you're spending your time.
And it's almost opposite. Like, it's after we last spoke, I wrote this, just did some reflective writing, and I wrote something about how actually you sort of take a trip, but actually it's almost like that's reality. We take trips every day with our thoughts. Like, one thought can be a bad trip. So it's almost like the opposite.
To believe that you are somebody doing anything at all is a trip. It is. It's a hallucination. It's not the way it appears. It's a hallucination. And as long as you believe the hallucination is real, you miss reality. Then people try to integrate their realizations and their spiritualizations and whatever it is into the identity of me. And that's just adding them into the trip.
Yes, and I can see that trap as well happening with, people thinking now that they need psychedelic to have this experience. It's like and not everybody can because of medical reasons or medication, things like that. So what would you say to people that, can't take I mean, is it needed? I guess that's the question. Do you?
Nothing is needed. Nothing is needed but your own willingness.
So what do you're almost at the end now of the first year of the psilocybin facilitator training that the Leela School's now offering for people to be registered as a service provider in the state of Oregon, US. What are you finding there? Are people having different experiences now than they were, when you were doing this work 30, 40 years ago?
Well, it's better prepared now, so I'd say it's going deeper. I think it's beautiful. People are having deep realizations.
And you mentioned intention. Can you talk a little bit about what does that mean exactly in this context?
What's your life about? People generally never examine what their life is about. They're too involved in the momentum of the karma of what's arising. So whether it's work or family or anything else, it's a momentum that carries itself. And people never say, well, what is my life really about? And so then most people give their lives to their family. So, this generation wants the next generation to thrive. And so you give your life to that, to being a good parent, to raising good people, to have them have healthy, happy lives. And that's what most people give their lives to. Security, safety, pleasure, family, sex, career, money, stuff. Without ever considering that there might be an alternative. There might be something more fundamental. And now, as we see the earth crashing, as we see life on earth itself threatened because of human doings, and we see the horror of war that's ongoing even as we speak, you see the human destruction. Maybe that breaks your heart enough that you're willing to give your life to something more important, more fundamental. That's a call to freedom. It's a call to love. It's alive in every heart, but most people can't hear it because they're too noisy. There's too much going on, too much activity, too much planning and scheming and thinking and feeling and hurting and going and doing, and that you can't hear it. But if you're quiet enough to hear your own heart, you find there's a deeper longing for something beyond what you can imagine. Because everything that you can imagine comes from the past. It's just a different version of the past. What's unimaginable doesn't depend on the past. It depends on yourself and the true expression of yourself. Clear?
Clear, beautiful, very touching. I've been in such heartbreak, actually, for the world. So much suffering, Eli. I never realized, really, it's easy as a white, educated woman to not know what's going on, and it's just such deep suffering.
Yeah.
Do you feel that these medicines are here? Some people talk about, there's this idea of evolving with fungus, that we've evolved with mushrooms actually through history. So do you think there's something about that this
I had an old acquaintance of mine, Terence McKenna, was one of the pioneers in introducing psychedelic mushrooms into our culture. And his theory was, since the magic mushrooms, sacred mushrooms, grow in animal manure, and since we, from the time we come down from the trees, are searching for game, searching for what's edible, we will surely have seen these mushrooms growing out of the manure. And here we are.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, so many just artifacts, ancient artifacts depict these mushrooms, and they've been, I have to be honest, I haven't experienced that in a context of what you're doing, with this work, with this in a sacred ceremony way. It was only my own experimentation of, meditating and just naturally things that were coming. I didn't really know about Indigenous cultures at that time, but it definitely led me on a journey after that to seek out, or not even seek out, it just started happening that I spent quite a bit of time with Indigenous people, sleeping on the beach, camping out, and really immersing myself in their world, because I could relate to that. All of a sudden I felt connected to nature in such a deep way that I could feel the earth, and the trees were talking to me. And, most people that have had psychedelics in a natural setting will experience that, the trees
Yes.
talk to you and the forest is singing, and, and it's just beautiful, and it stays with you, and you do have this deep connection. And that's what I see with Indigenous people. They have this connection to the earth. They know that we're part of it. They know we're linked inextricably to that. And so that's really beautiful that you're connecting to that with the work that you're offering. And how, I guess the question is, how do you use ceremony can I ask that question, is how is that used? How is this sort of Indigenous knowledge used now in this context of therapy and people waking up?
Those are different questions. There's Indigenous knowledge and there's ceremony. So ceremony is part of the theater. It sets the setting. It sets the context. It creates the space. It's a space holder. Indigenous knowledge is somehow inherent in the mushroom itself. And it transmits. The mushroom is a sacred teacher. And it's been teaching for countless, since we came out of the trees. And so there's that, and then there's the context for that. See, if you're holding it purely as a healing, that's beautiful, and you will get healing. But that's a limitation. It's deeper than healing. If you're holding it as awakening, as seeing yourself, that creates a different context, a different outcome. So really it's set and setting again.
Yeah, back to that. And awakening is healing in a sense, but I remember you said something to me many years ago, actually, that really stayed with me. It wasn't to me personally, it was in a meeting, in a satsang, and you said that there are some scars that never heal. And that just really actually was so useful, because we get on this thing of, needing healing, and I need healing. And, even now I have to admit, there's an aspect where, I've got some health challenges, I have migraine, and I start to think, oh, maybe perhaps there's some healing in this medicine for me on that level. And perhaps there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but there's
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. I mean, it could be useful, and I know there's some research into that, which is interesting. But just this trap of needing something the ego that needs something. And, I know you said that before, but I guess want to reiterate that you don't need this.
You don't need anything. Needing itself is the obstacle.
Unless you do need something, unless there's...
Right. And then it arises naturally.
Yes, I do have one more question.
Good.
Is the balance of wanting this to be useful for people and also just being with you in presence, which is quite, it's just very touching, Eli, and deeply silencing. It takes the questions and they just kind of burst, because this presence is really all I want and what I love. And I want this to be useful for people. And
that's why I show up here with you, Sophia.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and I do want to be useful and serve humanity in this awakening.
Yes. And it's happening quite naturally. And as you let your heart break with the horror of the world, a deep compassion leads to a deep love. And love is service. Love expresses itself as service. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me, for inviting me onto your show.